A millionaire walks alone to his luxury car when he is confronted by a desperate robber demanding his keys and wallet. When he hesitates, the situation dangerously escalates and the criminal begins to use physical force to overpower him. At this critical moment, a 7-year-old girl, the same street child he helps daily with food, emerges from the shadows carrying a baseball bat found in the trash. With all the strength of her small body, she does something unbelievable. The biting Tuesday wind cut across Edward Stanton's face like invisible blades as he walked through the private parking lot of his company. At 52, the businessman had built a financial empire few truly understood, but his real passion remained hidden in the city's shadows, discreetly helping children living on the streets. That night, his heart was still warmed by the memory of Sophia's shy smile, the 7-year-old girl he met daily near his office. She always waited for him with those large, hopeful eyes, receiving a sandwich and a few coins, with a gratitude that touched his soul in an inexplicable way. The smell of wet asphalt mixed with distant car exhaust created a dense atmosphere in the night air. Edward adjusted his expensive suit jacket against the cold and quickened his pace toward his black sedan, thinking about the meeting he had just finished. The quarterly figures were excellent, but his mind was far from profits. The parking lot was strangely silent for that hour. Only a few lights worked properly, casting pools of yellow light amidst long stretches of darkness. Edward had always considered himself a cautious man in business, but on the streets he maintained a dangerous naivete about the urban risks surrounding him. When he was just a few feet from his car, a shadow moved between the concrete pillars. Edward stopped instinctively, his sharp business instincts picking up something out of the ordinary. The sound of slow footsteps echoed through the empty space, approaching deliberately. "Good evening, sir." A hoarse voice emerged from the shadows, laden with a desperate urgency that made Edward take a step back. A thin man in ragged clothes and with glazed eyes emerged from the darkness. His hands trembled visibly, whether from the cold or something more disturbing. Edward felt his heart quicken, but kept his voice firm. "Good evening. Can I help you with something?" His natural generosity outweighed his self-preservation instinct, even when all signs indicated imminent danger. "You can." The man moved closer, revealing a face consumed by hopelessness. "I need your keys and your wallet, now." The words came out as a menacing whisper that echoed through the empty parking lot. Edward felt his blood run cold. For decades building businesses, he had faced ruthless adversaries in boardrooms, but he had never found himself in a situation like this. His rational mind tried to process the situation, seeking a solution that didn't involve violence. "Listen, my friend," Edward began, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "I know you must be going through hard times. I can give you some money, help you in another way. It doesn't have to be like this." The assailant laughed bitterly, a sound devoid of any humor. "You don't get it, do you? I'm not asking for charity. I'm taking what I need." His eyes narrowed, dangerously. "The keys and the wallet, last chance." Edward hesitated, his privileged mind struggling to comprehend a reality so far removed from his daily experience. This hesitation would cost him dearly. The man advanced with surprising speed, shoving Edward against the car with brutal force. Pain exploded in his back as he hit the cold metal. The assailant grabbed him by the collar of his expensive suit, his fingers tightening with increasing strength. Edward tried to defend himself, but his corporate muscles were no match for the violent desperation attacking him. It was then that a small figure emerged from the shadows on the other side of the parking lot, running in absolute silence. Sophia held something long in her hands, her determined steps cutting the distance between her and the two struggling men. The fate of both would be decided in the next few seconds. The discarded baseball bat vibrated in the night air before, hitting the assailant's back with a dull thud that echoed through the parking lot. The man cried out in pain and surprise, immediately letting go of Edward to turn toward the new attacker. Sophia remained still for a moment, the bat still raised in her small hands, eyes wide at her own courage. At 7 years old, she had just done something that would change her life forever, but in that instant, she only knew she needed to help the kind man who always gave her food. "You cursed brat!" The assailant snarled, stumbling as he brought a hand to his aching back. His face, contorted with rage, turned to the brave little figure who had dared to interfere with his plans. "You don't know who you're messing with." Edward took advantage of the distraction to move away from the car, his lungs burning as he regained his breath. His mind was still processing what had happened. The girl he helped daily had risked her own safety to save him. Gratitude and terror mixed overwhelmingly in his chest. "Sophia, run!" Edward cried, his voice hoarse. But the girl didn't move, holding the bat up like a small warrior defending her territory. Her ragged clothes fluttered in the cold wind, but her eyes gleamed with a determination that defied her tender age. The assailant took a step toward Sophia, but Edward interposed himself quickly. "Leave her alone. I'll give you what you want. But let the girl go." His hands frantically searched for his phone in his pocket, trembling fingers fumbling to dial 911. Too late for that, big shot. The man spat on the ground, his eyes darting between Edward and Sophia with growing fury. "Now you both will pay for what you did." He advanced again, but Sophia was faster. The girl ran circles around the assailant, screaming with all the strength of her small lungs. "Help! Help! Somebody help!" Her voice echoed off the building walls, carrying a desperation that cut through the cold night like a deafening alarm. Edward finally managed to complete the call, his words tumbling out to the emergency operator. "Stanton Investments Parking, Lot 847 Oakwood Avenue. A robbery in progress. There's a child involved." The distant sound of sirens began to approach, making the assailant stop and look around with increasing nervousness. Sophia continued running, keeping a safe distance but refusing to abandon Edward completely. Her small heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. "This isn't over," the man yelled, pointing a threatening finger at Sophia before running toward the parking lot exit. "I know who you are, kid. I'll find you." The menacing words hung in the cold air as he disappeared into the street's shadows. Edward ran to Sophia, kneeling before her, his heart still pounding. The girl let the bat drop to the ground, her small arms trembling with adrenaline. "Are you okay?" Edward asked, his hands gently checking if she was hurt. Sophia's eyes welled, with tears, not from pain, but from the weight of what had just happened. "I was scared, but I couldn't let him hurt you, sir," she whispered, her small voice carrying a wisdom that shouldn't exist in a child so young. "You're always kind to me." The sirens grew louder, blue and red lights beginning to illuminate the parking lot walls. Edward hugged Sophia gently, feeling the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. He didn't know it yet, but that embrace would seal a destiny that would bind them forever. The police were arriving, but the true consequences of that night were only beginning to unfold. 3 days after the incident in the parking lot, Edward couldn't get Sophia out of his mind. The image of the brave girl wielding the baseball bat returned constantly, mixed with the echo of the assailant's threats. He had spent sleepless nights, tossing and turning in his luxurious penthouse, wondering where Sophia was sleeping. On Thursday morning, Edward left his office early, determined to find her. He walked the streets around the company, his heart clenching at every empty corner. He finally located her, sitting on the steps of an abandoned church, carefully arranging a few items in a torn plastic bag. "Sophia!" Edward called, quickening his pace. The girl looked up and a shy smile lit up her grimy face when she recognized him. She stood up quickly, smoothing down her ragged dress as if preparing for a special occasion. "Hi, Mr. Stanton." she said softly, her large eyes shining with a genuine joy that contrasted with the simplicity of her situation. "I thought I wouldn't see you anymore after what happened." Edward knelt before her, feeling a lump in his throat. "Sophia, I came to thank you for what you did. You saved my life." He took a thick envelope from his pocket. "I want to give you this. It's enough money for you to be well for a long time, maybe find a family to take care of you." Sophia looked at the envelope with curiosity but didn't reach for it. Her small fingers nervously fidgeted with the strap of the bag as she processed the man's words. "Mr. Stanton," she began with that peculiar seriousness of children who had grown up too fast. "My grandma always said good people should help each other. I didn't do anything expecting to get something." The response hit Edward like a punch to the gut. In his business world, every favor had a price, every kindness expected reciprocation. The purity of that refusal left him completely disarmed. "But Sophia, you need help. Where do you sleep? What do you eat when I'm not here?" Real concern tinged his voice, revealing a vulnerability he rarely showed anyone. The girl shrugged, a gesture that tried to seem carefree but carried the weight of someone who had learned to survive alone. "I manage. There are some safe places to sleep, and sometimes people give me food." She paused, biting her lower lip. "My grandma said God always takes care of the little ones." Edward felt a mixture of admiration and despair. Sophia's innocent faith sharply contrasted with his own worldview, built on control and planning. "And your family, your parents?" Sophia's eyes clouded for a moment. "I don't have any known family. Grandma died last year and I've been living on the street since then." She spoke with the naturalness of someone who had already accepted her reality, but Edward perceived the hidden pain behind the apparent resignation. "Sophia, at least let me help you find a safe place to live." "After what happened?" Edward hesitated, not wanting to scare her, but worried about the threats that had been made. "The bad man said he was going to find me," Sophia murmured suddenly, as if she had read his thoughts. Her words came out so softly that Edward barely heard them, but the impact was devastating. Edward felt his blood run cold. "When did he say that?" "Before the police came. He yelled that he knew who I was." Sophia hugged the bag against her chest, a defensive gesture that revealed the fear she was trying to hide. "But I'm not scared. Good people always win, right?" The innocent question echoed in Edward's chest like an alarm bell. At that moment he realized that the real battle was just beginning, and that his wealth might not be enough to protect the brave girl who had saved his life. The danger was closer than either of them imagined. A week had passed since the conversation at the abandoned church, and Edward couldn't concentrate on his business meetings. Every financial report seemed irrelevant compared to the constant worry he carried in his chest. Sophia had refused his direct help, but he couldn't simply ignore the danger hanging over her. That Friday morning, Edward decided to leave early again to look for her. He found Sophia near the downtown market, sitting alone on a park bench, watching from afar the other street kids who used to be her friends. Silent tears streamed down her grimy face, and her hunched posture revealed a defeat he had never seen in her before. "Sophia, what happened?" Edward sat beside her, noticing how she nervously looked around before answering. "Nobody wants to talk to me anymore," she whispered, her voice laden with deep sadness. "Leo, who always shared food with me, said he can't see me anymore. Mrs. Rodriguez from the bakery, who sometimes gave me old bread, now sends me away when I get close." Edward felt a cold rage consume his chest. "Did someone say anything to them?" Sophia nodded slowly. "Some men went around talking to everyone. They said anyone who helped me would have problems." She wiped her nose on her sleeve. "Leo said they showed pictures of hurt kids, said that's what happens to people who don't listen." The calculated cruelty of the strategy left Edward speechless. The criminals weren't just directly threatening Sophia, they were destroying her survival network, forcing her into complete isolation. It was a refined psychological torture designed to break a child's spirit. And that's not all. Sophia continued, her voice growing even softer. Mr. Henderson, who takes care of the church where I sometimes sleep, said I can't stay there anymore. He's scared something might happen to the church if he helps me. Edward put his arm around Sophia's thin shoulders, feeling how much thinner she was than before. You haven't been eating properly, have you? I can't ask anyone for food. Everyone's scared. She leaned against him, seeking comfort. Mr. Stanton, I think they're going to succeed. I don't know how to live alone like this anymore. At that moment, Edward saw a familiar man watching them from afar. It was Robert Hayes, his company's CFO, someone he had trusted for years. When their gazes met, Robert quickly averted his eyes and hurried away. A terrible suspicion began to form in Edward's mind. Sophia, have you seen that man before? He discreetly pointed to Robert, who was walking away. Sophia narrowed her eyes, studying the departing figure. I think so. He was talking to one of the bad men the other day. I thought it was a coincidence. Edward's blood ran cold. If Robert was involved, it meant his own company was compromised. The criminals had access to privileged information about his movements, his resources, his plans. The betrayal came from within. Sophia, we need to leave here now, Edward said, getting up quickly, and we can't meet in the usual places anymore. Why? What's happening? Sophia followed him, but he noticed she was limping slightly. Mr. Stanton, my foot hurts. I think I stepped on some glass yesterday. Edward quickly examined her foot and saw that an infection was starting in the cut. Without proper medical care and nutrition, the wound could become serious. The situation was deteriorating on multiple fronts simultaneously. Let's take care of your foot first, Edward decided. Then we'll talk about the changes we need to make. As he helped Sophia walk, Edward realized he was facing a much broader conspiracy than he had imagined. His enemies weren't just street criminals. There was an organized network that included people close to him, people he trusted. The battle for Sophia's safety had become a war on multiple fronts, and Edward was starting to realize that he might not know how to distinguish allies from enemies. Edward spent Thursday night sleepless, discreetly investigating Robert Hayes's activities at his company. What he discovered profoundly disturbed him. Robert wasn't just a corrupt employee, passing information. He was involved in a much larger and more dangerous operation. On Friday morning, Edward hired a private investigator, Carl Jensen, a former police officer with a solid reputation for delicate cases. Carl examined the evidence Edward had collected with an increasingly grave expression. Mr. Stanton, what you've discovered is just the tip of the iceberg, Carl explained, spreading photographs and documents across the table. This Robert Hayes doesn't work alone. He's part of a network that controls specific territories in the city through intimidation and violence. Edward studied the images with growing horror. Are you saying the assailant that night wasn't just a common criminal? Exactly. He works for an organization that has very specific rules about interference in their business. Carl pointed to a map marked with different colors. They control drug distribution points, child labor exploitation, forced begging. When your little friend interfered in that robbery, she didn't just save your life. She challenged an established criminal structure. The revelation hit Edward like a punch to the gut. Sophia had no idea what she was doing. She's just a child trying to survive. To them it doesn't matter, Carl replied gravely. In this organization's mindset, any challenge to their authority must be publicly punished. It serves as an example for others who might think of interfering. Edward stood up and walked to the window, observing the city he thought he knew. How did Robert get involved in this? He'd been deep in gambling debt for years. This organization offers jobs to people in desperate situations. Robert probably started by passing simple information in exchange for debt forgiveness, but now he's completely involved. Carl paused. And there are more people in your company, Mr. Stanton. Edward turned sharply. Who? I'm still investigating, but at least 3 employees have ties to this network. Your personal security, your schedules, your financial resources. They know everything. The magnitude of the betrayal left Edward temporarily speechless. People he had trusted for years were not only spying on his activities, but actively contributing to putting Sophia in danger. There's more, Mr. Stanton, Carl continued reluctantly. They know about your generosity with street children. It's not just Sophia who's at risk. Any child you help could become a target. Edward felt his legs weaken. His attempt to do good in the world had become a death sentence for the city's most vulnerable children. What do they want from me? Initially, they wanted you to stop helping Sophia and distance yourself completely. But now that you've become more deeply involved, they see you as a threat that needs to be neutralized. Carl gathered the documents. Mr. Stanton, these people don't make empty threats. They have resources, organization, and an absolute lack of scruples. Edward sat down heavily, the weight of the responsibility crushing his shoulders. Sophia is out there alone now, with no one to help her, while these criminals plan their next move. Actually, sir, I have some troubling news about that too, Carl said hesitantly. My street contacts say the girl disappeared last night. No one has seen her since. Edward's world stopped. Sophia, the brave girl who had saved his life, was missing, likely in the hands of criminals who had no limits. And all this had happened because he had tried to protect her using conventional methods against enemies who respected no civilized rules. The war had escalated to a level Edward never imagined possible, and now he faced the terrible possibility that his attempt to save Sophia might have resulted in the complete destruction of her life. Edward's despair reached levels he had never experienced. Sophia had been missing for 3 days, and each passing hour diminished the chances of finding her alive. He had hired more investigators, offered rewards, contacted every possible connection. But the streets remained silent about the girl's whereabouts. On Monday morning, Edward arrived at the company earlier than usual, determined to confront Robert Hayes. But when he entered his office, he found a sight that left him even more shaken. Robert was there, accompanied by 2 men Edward didn't know, rifling through his personal files. "Robert," Edward yelled, making the 3 men turn quickly. "What are you doing here?" Robert smiled with a coldness Edward had never seen before. "Good morning, Edward. I was waiting for you to arrive." His voice had a casual tone that contrasted dramatically with the gravity of the situation. "My friends here wanted to get to know your social investments better." "Where's Sophia?" Edward asked directly, ignoring the presence of the other men. "I know you're involved in her disappearance." "Sophia," Robert pretended to think. "Oh yes, the brave girl who didn't know when to stop meddling." He leaned back in Edward's chair with arrogance. "She's safe for now, but that depends a lot on your cooperation." Edward felt rage explode in his chest. "Robert, I trusted you for years. How could you betray that trust and put an innocent child in danger?" "Trust?" Robert laughed bitterly. "Edward, you never really saw me. I was just another efficient employee doing your dirty work, while you played philanthropist with your crumbs for the poor." One of the unknown men approached Edward. He was tall, with visible scars on his face and eyes that showed no emotion. "Mr. Stanton, my name is Marcus. I represent certain people interested in your situation." "What people?" Edward asked, but he already suspected the answer. "People who don't like it when strangers interfere with their business," Marcus replied. Calmly, Your little friend caused a significant problem for our organization. Now you need to help solve that problem." Edward realized he was surrounded, not just physically, but strategically. "What do you want?" Robert stood up and walked to the window. "It's simple, Edward. You'll transfer $5 million to an account we specify. You'll sign some documents, transferring specific properties. And most importantly, you'll completely stop getting involved with street children." "And if I refuse?" Marcus took a phone from his pocket and showed Edward a picture. It was Sophia, clearly injured, sitting in a dark place with her eyes blindfolded. Edward's heart stopped for a moment. "She's alive, as you can see," Marcus said without emotion. "But she had a small accident yesterday, fell down some stairs, hit her head, needs urgent medical care." He put the phone away. "Care she'll only receive if you cooperate completely." Edward felt his legs tremble. The image of Sophia, injured and scared, burned into his mind like hot iron. "You're monsters. She's just a child." "She's a child who made an adult decision." "That night in the parking lot," Robert interjected coldly, "adult decisions have adult consequences." "You have until noon tomorrow to arrange everything," Marcus added, walking toward the door. "After that, we cannot guarantee the girl's safety." When the three men left, Edward collapsed into his chair, the weight of the situation completely crushing him. His attempt to protect Sophia had turned into a nightmare that now threatened to destroy not only his financial life, but potentially the girl's own life. He had less than 24 hours to make the most difficult decision of his life: yield to the criminal's demands or risk everything in a desperate attempt to save Sophia. The battle had become personal, and the price of failure was unthinkable. Edward didn't sleep that night. He spent the hours walking around his apartment, trying to find a solution that would save Sophia without completely yielding to the criminal's demands. At 5 in the morning, his phone rang. It was Carl, the private investigator, his voice tense with urgency. "Mr. Stanton, I found Sophia," Carl said quickly. "She's at City General Hospital in the emergency room. She was brought in 2 hours. Go by an ambulance." Edward felt his heart pound. "How is she? What happened?" "Officially, it was a traffic accident. She was crossing a busy street when she was hit by a car that didn't stop to render aid." Carl paused significantly. "But sir, based on what we know about this organization, I don't believe it was accidental." Edward was already getting dressed. As he spoke, "I'm going there now. Can you meet me at the hospital?" "I'm already here, sir, and there's something else you need to know. The police are treating it as a common accident, but I found a witness who saw the car waiting on the corner for almost an hour before Sophia appeared." Edward rushed to the hospital faster than he ever had before. He found Carl in the pediatric ICU hallway, talking in low tones with a nurse. When he saw him arrive, Carl approached with a grave expression. "How is she?" Edward asked, before even greeting him. "She suffered head trauma, several broken ribs, and a fractured leg. The doctors say she was lucky to be alive, but—" Carl hesitated. "Mr. Stanton, she's been unconscious since she arrived. We don't know when she'll wake up." Edward felt his legs weaken. He pulled up a chair and sat down heavily, staring at the ICU door where Sophia was fighting for her life. "Can I see her? For 5 minutes, family only." Carl showed him a document. "I managed to get you temporarily registered as her responsible guardian." Edward entered the ICU and saw Sophia for the first time since her disappearance. She looked even smaller in the hospital bed, surrounded by tubes and monitors. Her small face was swollen, with purple bruises around her closed eyes. Her breathing was assisted by machines that emitted constant mechanical sounds. "Sophia," Edward whispered, gently holding her small, cold hand. "I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. I should have protected you better." A nurse approached gently. Sir, she had moments of semi-consciousness during the night. She kept calling out for someone named Edward. Is that you? Edward nodded, feeling tears burn his eyes. Did she say anything else? She kept repeating that it wasn't your fault, that good people need to help each other. The nurse touched Edward's arm with compassion. Even injured like this, she was worried about someone else. She's a very special girl. When Edward left the ICU, he found Carl waiting with more disturbing information. Sir, I got the security camera footage from the area. The car that hit Sophia was definitely waiting for her. After the accident, the driver got out, checked if she was breathing, and drove off. They wanted to hurt her, but not kill her. Edward understood with horror. It was a message. They're showing they can do anything to her. Exactly, and there's more. Robert Hayes was seen leaving the hospital an hour ago. He came to personally check on the progress. Edward felt a cold, calculated rage consume his chest. This rage was different from anything he had felt before. Not explosive, but icy and determined. Carl, I need information on everyone involved in this organization. Names, addresses, weaknesses, everything. Mr. Stanton, what are you planning? Edward looked through the window at the ICU, where Sophia fought for her life, surrounded by machines. They want to play a game without rules? Then we'll play without rules, but this time, I make the rules. The transformation was complete. Edward was no longer the cautious businessman trying to solve problems through appropriate channels. Sophia had become his daughter in every way that mattered, and he would do anything to protect her and avenge what they had done to her. Edward spent 3 days meticulously planning his response. He used all his company resources to investigate. The criminal organization hired discreet security personnel and, most importantly, discovered exactly where Robert and his associates met. It was time to end this definitively. On Thursday night, Edward was in the same parking lot where it all began 3 weeks earlier. But this time, he was not alone and defenseless. Carl and a small team of security personnel were strategically positioned around the location. Edward had used his influence to ensure the police were on standby, waiting for the right moment to act. Robert appeared promptly at 9 o'clock, accompanied by Marcus and 2 other men. They walked confidently toward the agreed-upon location, clearly expecting to find Edward ready to surrender to their demands. "Edward," Robert called, his voice echoing through the empty parking lot. "I hoped you would have learned your lesson after what happened to your little friend." Edward stepped out of the shadows, but his posture was completely different from that night 3 weeks ago. There was no hesitation or fear in his movements. "I've learned many lessons, Robert. The main one is that people like you only understand one language." Marcus stepped forward, threateningly. "Where's our money? The transfers we asked for." "The money is safe," Edward replied calmly, "in accounts that federal authorities are monitoring right now, along with complete evidence of money laundering, extortion, and attempted murder." Robert's confident expression changed instantly. "What are you talking about?" Edward took a recorder from his pocket. "All the conversations I recorded over the past few days, including our meeting in my office where you admitted to intentionally hurting Sophia." "You can't prove anything," Marcus snarled, taking a threatening step toward Edward. It was then that powerful lights flashed on around the parking lot, revealing at least 10 police officers strategically positioned. A megaphone's voice echoed through the space. "Police! Everyone on the ground! Hands on your head!" Robert tried to run, but was immobilized immediately. Marcus pulled a gun, but before he could use it, he was tackled by 2 officers. The other 2 men surrendered without resistance, realizing they were completely surrounded. "How did you manage all this?" Robert yelled as he was handcuffed. Edward approached him, his voice icy. "You underestimated what a man is capable of when someone he loves is hurt. I used every contact, every favor people owed me, every resource. of my company." He paused. "And I discovered you made a fatal mistake." "What mistake?" "You hurt Sophia in the middle of the street, in front of security cameras, and left witnesses. Federal authorities had been investigating your organization for months, but didn't have enough evidence." Edward smiled coldly. "I just handed them the complete case, and Sophia was the key piece of evidence." At that moment, Edward heard a sound that made his heart stop. Slow applause coming from the parking lot entrance. He turned and saw Sophia walking slowly toward him, leaning on crutches, but with that brave smile he had learned to love. "Sophia!" Edward ran to her, bending down to hug her gently. "How did you get out of the hospital?" "The doctors said I could leave today," she said, her voice still weak but determined. "And I wanted to be here when the bad men were arrested." She looked at Robert being put into the police car. "Good people always win in the end, right?" Edward hugged her tighter, feeling tears of relief streaming down his face. "Always, Sophia. Always." The parking lot where they had almost lost their lives was now the scene of their final victory. The courage of a 7-year-old girl had not only saved Edward's life, but also exposed an entire criminal network. Together, they had proven that sometimes heroes come in small packages, but with enormous hearts. 2 weeks after the criminal organization's arrest, Edward sat in the waiting room of the juvenile court, more nervous than he had ever been in his business life. Sophia was beside him, swinging her short legs as she waited, her crutches leaning against the chair next to her. She wore a new, light blue dress with small flowers, and her hair was clean and neatly combed. "Mr. Stanton, what if they say you can't adopt me?" Sophia asked softly, her voice carrying a vulnerability she rarely showed. Edward held her small hand gently. "Sophia, no matter what happens today, you'll always have a place in my life. But I'm sure everything will work out." He smiled at her. "Good people help each other, remember? And there are many good helping us now." Social worker Maria Thompson, the same one who had been frustratingly bureaucratic weeks earlier, was now actively working to facilitate the process. Sophia's exceptional situation and Edward's obvious dedication had touched even the most skeptical. "Employees of the system, Mr. Stanton," Maria called, approaching with a folder in her hands and a genuine smile on her face. "The judge is ready to see you both." In Judge Henry Miller's chambers, Edward felt his entire life being scrutinized. The magistrate, a 60-year-old man with kind but penetrating eyes, studied all the documents carefully before speaking. "Mr. Stanton, this is quite an unusual case," the judge began. "A child who saved an adult's life, who then became her protector against dangerous criminals." He looked at Sophia with affection. "Sophia, do you understand what it means to be adopted?" Sophia nodded seriously. "It means Mr. Stanton will be my real dad and I'll have a family." She hesitated. "And it means I won't sleep on the street or go hungry anymore." "And do you want that?" the judge asked gently. Sophia's eyes welled with tears of happiness. "I really do. Mr. Stanton has always been good to me, even when I was just a street kid nobody cared about." She looked at Edward with adoration. "He saved me too." The judge smiled and signed the final documents. "Therefore, by this act, I declare the adoption of Sophia Maria Jones by Mr. Edward Stanton official. Congratulations to the new family." Edward felt an overwhelming emotion take over his chest. Sophia threw herself into his arms, crying with joy, and he held her as if he would never let her go. "Now you're my real daughter, Sophia. And you're my real dad," she whispered in his ear. In the days that followed, Edward dedicated himself completely to helping Sophia adapt to her new life. She had initial difficulties, waking up in the middle of the night looking for threats, hiding food in her room for fear of hunger, and taking time to believe that this security was permanent. But gradually, with patience and constant love, Sophia began to blossom. She enrolled in school, made new friends, and discovered she had a natural talent for math. Her physical scars from the accident healed, but more importantly, her emotional scars also began to mend. Edward completely transformed his personal and professional life. He established a safety program for street children funded by his company, created a shelter with adequate protection measures, and worked with the police to identify and dismantle other similar criminal networks. "Dad," Sophia said one night, as Edward helped her with her homework, "do you think my grandma would be proud of me?" Edward looked at the extraordinary girl who had completely transformed his life. "I am absolutely sure she would be very proud. You not only saved my life, Sophia, you taught me what it truly means to be brave." That night, as Sophia slept safely in her own bed, Edward realized he had found a wealth he never knew existed. True family, built not by blood, but by mutual love, sacrifice, and courage. 5. Weeks after that cold Tuesday night that changed their lives forever, Edward and Sophia returned to the company parking lot. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. The area had been transformed with modern LED lighting, state-of-the-art security cameras, and a direct communication system with the police, all personally funded by Edward. Sophia walked beside her adoptive father, no longer the scared, lonely girl of weeks past, but a confident child carrying a new, colorful school backpack. Her clothes were appropriate for the weather, her hair shone with health, and most importantly, her eyes no longer constantly searched for threats. "Dad, it's strange to be here again," Sophia commented, stopping at the exact spot where she had struck the assailant with the discarded baseball bat. "It feels like a long time ago, but also like it was just yesterday." Edward knelt beside her, following her gaze to the ground where it all began. "How do you feel being here?" Sophia thought carefully before answering. "I feel strong. That night I was very scared, but I did what was right anyway." She smiled. "Grandma always said courage isn't not being afraid, it's doing what's right, even when you are afraid." Edward felt his chest warm with pride. "Your grandma was a very wise woman, and you inherited not only her wisdom but also her courage." They walked to Edward's car, now discreetly accompanied by 2 security guards who ensured they would never be defenseless again. But the true protection didn't come from the guards or the cameras. It came from the mutual love and determination they had developed. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Sophia said as she settled into the back seat of the car, where there was now an age-appropriate car seat. "Of course, Princess. Anything." "Do you regret helping me that first time? I mean, because of all the problems that happened?" Edward stopped the car and turned to look her in the eyes. "Sophia, listen closely to what I'm about to tell you. That night when you saved me was the most important moment of my life. Not because you saved me from death, but because you saved me from an empty life." "What do you mean?" "Before I met you, I had a lot of money, but I didn't have a real family. I had a big company, but I didn't have a real purpose." Edward smiled. "You taught me that true wealth isn't in bank accounts or properties, it's in having someone to love and protect." Sophia leaned forward and hugged Edward around the neck. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, my brave daughter." As they drove home, Edward thought about how their lives had been completely transformed. The baseball bat Sophia had used that night was now framed in his office, not as a trophy of victory, but as a reminder that heroes come in all sizes. The protection program for street children that Edward had established was already helping dozens of children, offering not only shelter and food, but real safety and opportunities for the future. Sophia often visited the center, sharing her story and inspiring other children to believe that their lives could change. "Dad," Sophia said when they arrived home, "tomorrow at school I'm presenting that project on heroes. Can I talk about you?" Edward chuckled. Sophia, the hero of this story is you. You saved my life, faced dangerous criminals, and taught me what it means to be truly brave. Then we can be heroes together, Sophia decided, running into the house, where a warm dinner, a safe home, and a future full of possibilities awaited her. That night, as he helped Sophia with her homework, Edward reflected on how an act of courage lasting mere seconds had created ripples that transformed not only their lives, but the lives of countless other children. Sometimes the most important moments of our lives begin with someone small doing something big, moved only by the simple desire to help another person. Sophia had proven that age doesn't determine courage, that size doesn't limit impact, and that sometimes saving someone means also being saved. The parking lot where they had almost lost everything had become the symbol of a new beginning, where an unlikely family was born of courage, grew through suffering, and flourished in unconditional love.